Okay, welcome everyone. I am very, humbled to offer today's presentation, No More Stolen People, Keep It Moving with Awareness, Empowerment, and Action. Today's presentation is very important. And I think we've got some great presenters today that's going to provide you with a lot of good and up-to-date information. Today's presentation is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Child Trauma TSA Category 2 Center. We are part of the NCTSN, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We are located in Iowa at the College of Public Health at the University of Iowa, and we are funded through SAMHSA. Next slide, please. So the National American Indian Alaska Native Childhood Trauma Center is supported by a grant through SAMHSA. So the content of this event is created by the presenters and the presenters alone, and does not necessarily reflect the views or the policies of SAMHSA, HHHS, or the American Indian Alaska Native NCTSN. And next slide. This is our land acknowledgement. Please take just a few minutes to look and read this over. This land acknowledgement was made by 3 of our co-workers, Ella Driscoll, Sean Bayer, and Keely Driscoll. Next slide, please. Someone's already asked a question in the chat. Yes, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation following today's events, and it will be featured on our website and our YouTube channel, and we will post all that information in the chat before we end today. I could already see that 85 people is on, which is exactly what I wanted, which means I was right on. This is going to be a very important webinar we have today. At the end of today's presentation, we will put the evaluation survey into the chat. Please it just takes maybe literally a minute. Go in there and fill it out. It just lets us know how we're doing. Next slide, please. My name is Teresa Brewington. I'm Coharie enrolled Lumbee descendant. I do work for the Native Center for Behavioral Health, and I am the co-director of the American Indian Alaska Native Childhood Trauma Center, as well as the co-director of the MHDC K-12 school program. I live here on the Meskwaki settlement with my husband and granddaughter. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my colleague, I think. So go ahead. There you go, Liz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I am the program coordinator for the National American Indian Alaska Native Childhood Trauma TSA Category 2. I have a Master's of Public Health and Community and Behavioral Health, as well as a certificate in health education. I have a health education specialty. So I will pass it off to Olivia. I will be introducing our GRA, Eleanor Witt. She is a master's degree in the counseling program who has been working with us for the past year and being amazing. So now I will pass it off to Olivia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivia Walker. Although, I have my professional information up here, I am on the webinar today as a family member who has experienced the MMIW movement.
Thank you, Olivia. Lestina.
Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings, my relatives. My name is Lestina Saul-Merdassi, and I currently work as a behavioral health counselor and a project coordinator to address sex trafficking in the American Indian and Alaska Native communities. My professional information and my personal information is also up on the screen. So with that, I will pass it off to Teresa.
I'm Teresa Zubrill. I am Anishinaabe and Menominee descent. I live in northern Wisconsin, near Upper Michigan, and Lake Superior. There's a bit of my background. It is vast. I'm more on a traditional basis as I work and move from. but also experience and education as well. I'm going to pass it off. I'm also a consultant and on the AOD Advisory Council for ATTC. And I'm going to pass it off to Teresa Brewington to introduce our amazing speaker today, Olivia, talk a little bit more about her and what she's bringing us. Miigwech.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to Olivia Walker. She is here today to represent Rita Papaki, who is Meskwaki. She is a family member and has been a very big advocate for the family. We have asked her to come on here today and speak about her experience with this. This may be a little emotional for some. If you need to take a breath, please do so. Please make sure that we are always respectful to our relatives. Olivia?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for being here today. So yeah, I think I have about 20 minutes to share my family story, and then I'll just kind of speak. And then if there's any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat and I can address it at the end of my time talking. But yeah, I'm here to talk about my cousin Rita Papaki's story. We can go to the next slide. I did just want to do a little introduction. I know that I already had one slide, but I currently work as a health equity coordinator for the state of Iowa, Health and Human Services. I have a background working in tribal government, local public health. I served in kind of health equity and doing a lot of advocacy for prevention and intervention, both in the city of Minneapolis and Portland, Oregon, before coming back home in 2018. I'm the mother of 2 children. They are Meskwaki and Navajo. I would say I'm definitely a community member with a lot of responsibility since moving back home. I I've kind of stepped into that auntie role, right? Where it's really about, like when, your parents or your aunts or uncles ask you to do something, you step in and do it. I'm really proud of the career that I've led. Actually, when I worked for the city of Minneapolis, I got to assist with the implementation of the safe harbors legislation. It was about no wrong door services for folks who had been trafficked, and really putting an eye on domestic minor sex trafficking, in particular, looking at the indigenous communities in Minnesota that have been disproportionately impacted by sex trafficking and violence against women and children over the years. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. I also did kind of want to do a little bit of grounding about where I come from, the community that I come from, and the community that Rita comes from. We are from the Meskwaki Nation, which is located in central Iowa. We have around, I would say, like 3,000 tribal members and descendants who, still live close to home. We're a fairly close-knit community. You're either related to everyone or you're friends with everyone. I would say that we also have unique history compared to many other tribes, which in some sense, through, some of the terrible things that happened around genocide and assimilation with federal Indian policy, we're actually able to maintain a lot of our culture and language. We celebrate Proclamation Day in the 1850s, when after forced removal down to Kansas, we actually came back and bought our land from the state of Iowa. And so we have a very unique history in that way. So like I said, have been able to retain a lot. At the same time, we've also suffered from similar problems that were introduced through colonization. So, impacted by racism, sexism, boarding schools. I would say that, like we have our fair share of issues around behavioral health issues and mental health issues, addiction, over involvement in the justice system and child welfare system. And so there are very many beautiful things about our community, especially when it comes to, language and cultural revitalization, but also, kind of comes with the complications of being Indigenous in this country. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. I did want to do a little bit of grounding to talk about my cousin Rita, just because I think it's important not just to talk about what happened to her, but really talking about the person that she was. She grew up on the settlement. She was one of 8 siblings. We have a huge family. Our parents come from a family of 10 siblings, and so very, very large family. Lots of children and great grandchildren at this point. Rita has 4 children herself. She now has 2 grandchildren who have never met her. She loved to spend a lot of time with family. She loved to cook. I would say, like, people just knew her as a good person. She had a very strong moral compass. despite all those great things about her, you know, she also did struggle with some issues. She struggled with addiction and substance abuse. Really a lot in her later years that she had been around. I would say she had a lot of good years and bad years. But you know, in the good years, like our family has been super connected. You know, I'm one of those folks who, you know, posts like parental divorce, spent a lot of time outside of the settlement, but she was born and raised, continued to live there up until the time of her disappearance. You know, for me, when I think back, you know, like we'd have family volleyball games, we would celebrate birthdays, we'd have potlucks. She used to host game nights at our house. Which was really wonderful. And, you know, in years that she kind of struggled and went through some things, our family also stepped up and stepped in to help support her and her family, her children in particular. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. We can go to the next slide. I actually remember the last time that I saw Rita. I had been living in Minneapolis. I was pregnant with my second child. I was back for Christmas in 2014. And checked into the casino because we were there for the holidays. We're going to visit family, and I ended up running into her, and she was kind of in one of those rough episodes, but I got a chance to see her, hug her, let her know I was thinking about her. You know, the folks that she had been hanging out with at that time, you know, weren't always thinking about her in her best interest, which was concerning. But, you know, we always got a chance to like get together and talk about how much we loved her. You know, along with some of those issues, she did have a history of kind of going missing here and there. She'd disappear for a week here, a week there. She'd always call and check in with her mom, Iris, though. And so in January of 2015, the last known place that she was seen in their surveillance footage was leaving the Meskwaki Casino on the settlement where we're from on January 15th. You know, a few weeks went by. Iris, my aunt, who, you know, typically had heard from her at that point, got a little concerned after a couple weeks. So that's when they started to launch into, you know, checking in with folks and just trying to see, you know, if anybody had heard from her, if anybody had seen her. You know, there had been reports of, you know, seeing her jump out of a car here. She was at this place. But nothing that really added up. And so we ended up filing a formal police. Well, I didn't. Our family ended up contacting police and filing a missing persons report. Of course, small community, it blew up pretty quickly. And they launched into a search. You know, and it's just one of those things when you lose that time, you know, to really be able to track stories, track issues, it does make things difficult. And so there's just kind of a point where it became a very real situation of like, we don't know where she's at. We don't know what happened to her. You know, I had expressed at this time I'd been living in Minneapolis. So that for me kind of added in that layer of helplessness of not really knowing what I could do, right? They ended up launching into physical searches of the settlement and surrounding areas. At the same time, rumors started to fly, you know, about what might have happened, what could have happened, who she was hanging out with, you know, just a lot of rumors that we know that was shared with the police. And we know, you know, we have our own police department. We also were working, you know, with the federals at that point. We also ended up doing some media at that point and working with other folks who had been doing cadaver searches, you know, which is like worst case scenario. You know, our hope has always been, you know, maybe we'll find her somewhere. But, you know, the community has come together when we've needed it. I would say that, you know, it's now September 1st, 2022, and she has been missing for 7.5 years. The more years that go by, you know, is the less likely belief that we believe that we will have any closure or justice. You know, along with those rumors in a small community, it's one of those things where it's like, well, we can probably narrow it down to, you know, who might have been involved with her disappearance. We still have folks come to our family and share, you know, really disturbing stories that they've heard that have, you know, maybe been sensationalized over the years. We know that tips continue to come in to the police department on the year of her disappearance. We typically will do some media, you know, just trying to raise awareness and letting folks know, like, if you know something, say something. But yeah, that has really been what we've experienced. You know, from a cultural perspective as Meskwakis, there are things that we do. Like I said, we still have retained a lot of our our cultural doings, our spiritual doings. We have not been able to get that spiritual closure and all the things that we would typically do, when we lose a relative. And so I would say because of that, there's also still a lot of open wounds for our family, just because we just don't know. We say she's missing. Is she missing, presumed murdered? What could have happened? Again, with the folks that she was hanging out with, was it a drug overdose? Did an accident happen? Did somebody come after her? We really have no information, and that's what makes it really difficult for our family. And I would say also, through the past 7 years of that, it's really kind of shifted how we approach it, both as a family and the community, but also thinking about the advocacy that we can do. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So, as I said, over the years, as people learned her story, there's been a lot of requests that have come in to ask us to share her story, and really talk about that advocacy piece. When I moved back home to Iowa in 2018, I really kind of stepped into that role to assist and work with the media, as well as, any other speaking engagement or opportunities came up to raise awareness so that this doesn't happen to another family. To really think about some of those systems implications, right? People don't just go missing overnight. We know that, there's a lot of undervaluing of Indigenous women, again, related to genocide, assimilation, disproportionate, violence against women in our communities. And so I really feel like, we don't want to see this happen to another family. We have attended a lot of events, we've, helped support, National MMIW MMIP Day, which happens in May. I have a couple pictures up. One of those is from an event that was sponsored by some of our state-led organizations, including the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, with big help from Derek Jefferson, who's a member of our community. On the right, we have a picture of a very special event. It was really near and dear to us, and this is really what led us into the advocacy space in the city of Minneapolis on Valentine's Day, and obviously COVID-related cancellations the last couple of years, but they have had a march happen on Valentine's Day of every year to really raise awareness for MMIW, and our family has really taken to that event as a place where we can come together, we can, remember and celebrate Rita's life, but also, let folks know this is a significant issue that doesn't just impact our family, impacts a lot of other families. And I would say, advocacy has given our family more control over the situation, in places where we don't really feel like we have control. Well, I think it's really important that folks understand the context of MMIW and MMIP on a local and national level. As I said before, what contributes to the undervaluing of our women? What has that disproportionate violence against our women look like over the years? We know that it's rooted in colonization. We also know that there are a lot of systems gaps when it comes to criminal justice. And so there's just a lot more that we can do at the community level, as well as the local, state and national level to help support this work. We can go ahead and go to the next page. I do want to share, we've had a lot of great support from both members in our community, as well as the tribal council, who initially put out a reward of $25,000, which was then raised to 50, and then to 75, and now it's up to 100,000, which to me, you don't want to put a price on anybody, but, we really have a commitment from our tribal government to say, they also want to know what happened. They also want us to have closure. We want to know what happened. If there is a need for justice, let's get some justice for her. I have another, there's a flyer right there that kind of talks about recent information that's come out. And so our whole stance is, whether it's now, whether it's later, we want people to speak up and say something if they know something. Again, with the size of our community, we just know that somebody has to know, and they're covering for other people. So, I always think, what kind of guilt they have to be living with to know what happened and to not say anything. They have to know what that experience is like for her children. All of those milestones that happen in life that she hasn't been able to celebrate, whether it is the birth of her grandchildren, whether it's high school graduations, whether it's just getting that time and space necessary, when it comes to spending time with family. And so we're not giving up. We continue to show up and raise awareness. We continue to have really beautiful events in our community. I know on my first slide, we had a big picture where you could see a bunch of folks. We just had a run for her birthday to celebrate her. She would have been, I believe, 49 this year. And so it's just really good to know that, we can still come together and celebrate as a community. I know that we're really lucky. Like there are other cases where folks don't even know about it, or folks have been missing for years, or we don't get cooperation from local police. You don't get cooperation from other folks. So I would say in a lot of ways, I know that we're incredibly fortunate to have that in our small community. But again, we don't want to see this happen to anybody ever again. You can go to the next slide. I also thought it would be important to share this. Again, I'm here from the perspective of a family member who has experienced this loss. I think sometimes it can be really hard to articulate to folks. You don't know what to say, but I think just saying it out loud and letting folks know like that you care, that you want to do something, I think is helpful. I would also say that trauma-informed approaches are essential. Again, I said that, folks have approached us with pretty terrible stories about what might have happened to her. That's not something that I ever want her children to hear. It's not something that I ever want my aunt to have to experience. I'm kind of there as a buffer, somebody who also experienced a loss, but not to the extent, of being her daughter or her mother. And so just thinking about how you approach someone and how you want to support them, I think is just important to keep perspective. There's been years where there have been a lot of requests, and thinking about the emotional toll that our family members have to go through, sharing the story over and over and over, right? To talk about the loss in real time, to talk about all of the fallout that has happened since. It can be incredibly difficult. I will also share that I believe that everyone grieves differently. For me, I'm gonna step up and, really fall back on my public health expertise and my orientation to prevention, thinking about like, how can we prevent this happening to another person, and really thinking about like the system's response. But again, everyone grieves differently. We have family members who do not want to talk about it. They do not want to talk to media. They don't want to be front and center. There are folks who will kind of bend over backwards, to listen to anybody. And so I would just say, just be responsive to that, understand like, some people don't want to be re-traumatized over and over and over. And, some people are, kind of at the point where they're ready to move on. Some people are never going to move past that experience. So I think just be conscientious of that. For those who, I feel like we're probably speaking to the choir, but for those of you who don't have experience with this, it's so important to understand the history and context before making assumptions about any individual person and what they might or might not have experienced, when it comes to domestic violence situations, when there's been a murder or there's been, previous, altercations prior. Always think about that person. Don't make assumptions that they deserved it. Don't make assumptions that because, somebody, was suffering through behavioral health issues or addiction issues doesn't mean that they weren't a good person with a good heart. And so I think we really need to shift and frame how we talk about folks who have been impacted by this, and know that like there's always a way back. There's always hope that we hold for folks who are in really difficult situations. And again, as I've said, find ways to support and advocate in the community, whether it's attending webinars like today, whether it's talking to legislators about raising awareness, whether it's getting better data, right? Like in missing persons cases, whether it is, like working with your tribal government or other folks to think about, how we can get systems in place when a person does go missing. And so there's a lot of things that we can do. And I'm just really thankful that I was able to share this information. You can go to the last slide with everyone today. This is just a picture of my family. It was at one of the events that was sponsored. I can't even remember at this point. I think it was like a partnership with the police at that point. But we had also had a graphic design artist come in and put some beautiful visual art up, no more stolen sisters, really putting up like visible awareness of the MMIW movement. We have had a lot of really beautiful events that have honored her memory, and we're continually thankful for the ability to share her story. So that's all I have to say for now. I don't know if we have questions or comments in the chat.
Wow. Thank you for that, Olivia. That was both emotional and beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing that story. I am going to give it to the audience to speak up or either put their questions in the chat. You could raise your hands, just start speaking however way you want it. I do have a question for you, just kind of to start off with the Q&A, if that's okay. I know that the community has absolutely come together to do a lot for Rita. I do have a question. I know that when this first started, Meskwaki Police originally got involved. And I believe then the federal government came in. Is that correct? Can you kind of just walk us through the process? And then I heard you say that you did receive a lot of support. Just kind of walk us through how that process works. And then what type of support you were getting or not getting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we all know some of the jurisdictional gaps that exist across Indian country, and so I would just say like the biggest issue again was really that the first couple weeks where there hadn't been an official filing. But once that happened, it kind of kicked into gear a response. That being said, there's also over 7 years, you also see, the case being bumped from person to person, so that has happened with our police department. I would say, from like a federal BIA perspective, they cover large regions. And so it's not always necessarily going to be the priority, right? When you cover a large region that has, multiple missing persons cases happen over the course of years. And so, and I would just say that we have a lot of family members who did not have full faith and confidence in the police department at that time. Again, when the case is kind of shuffled here and there, when there's big gaps, when we know that like suspects have been identified and, have since passed on, right? Like we've seen suspects who are now no longer with us. And just feeling like more could have been done around assessing, information about potential suspects and information. And so while I say like overall, like, like there has been support, especially in the last couple of years, and with the shift of getting a new police commissioner in this year, really taking more of like centering the family versus centering the police department and media, I think has been a fundamental shift that has happened this year, which I really appreciate. I would just say, yeah, like, do we ever feel like they could do enough? And, when I think about the support that we've gotten from the community, again, we're small, we're close knit. I know other folks who have experienced losses, whether it's been folks who have gone missing or murdered, and there has been absolutely no response. In particular, knowing some of my friends who have lost family members in the city of Minneapolis and seeing the lack of response, not only from the police, but from the community. And so a part of it has to do with geography, right? Like part of it has to do with the fact that we're a fairly well-resourced tribe, who does have the money to set aside for a reward. Like I said, there are some very unique things about our community that have really given us, I think, a little bit more leverage. But again, like, do we feel like it's been enough? No, of course, we want the police banging on doors every single day. Because we're most likely never going to have closure. And so, we don't want other people to have closure either if they were involved. Like we want it in their face. We're lucky even with our family services domestic violence intervention program, they put up, posters, on the thoroughways that we know people live at, in terms of like between cities and the settlement. So we don't want her to be invisible. We want her story to be very visible. And we want folks to know that like we're never going to give up.
Olivia, do you have someone in charge of this case? And is it the Meskwaki Police or the federal, or is it the FBI?
Right now, it's the Meskwaki Police, and a part of that's just right. I can't remember when our police program was established, maybe in 2002. Before that, everything was handled, at the, I believe the BIA or the federal level. We also have an MOU in partnership with our local police departments who had previously provided some services on the settlement. We also kind of had a criminal like jurisdictional issue with double jeopardy for folks
Mhm.
on the settlement. There was actually a lot of advocacy that happened with some of our state legislators to get that alleviated so that we didn't have folks being charged in both, like county court and tribal court.
Yes. Thank you, Olivia. Teresa asked a question, if you could explain examples of family-centered versus police-centered and what that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. So again, I don't like want to poo-poo any sort of like good faith efforts that have happened. For me, it's all about like intent versus impact, right? So I just want to have that caveat. But I would say like a lot of the historical, like media, when folks were contacting the media, local stations. A lot of it was really centered on, well, the police have stepped forward and the police want this and the police are, or we're fighting. It was never, we always got a chance to kind of like add on, but it was never really about like being family centered or like centering, Rita. I would just say seeing that shift is like, right, like why do we have to do celebrations or recognition on the anniversary of her disappearance? Let's do it on her birthday. So this year, like I said, we had the 5K, brought community out. Iris was there, our whole family was there. We had birthday cakes. It was just a complete shift in terms of like what story we were centering, how we talked about Rita. And maybe that's just like a natural progression from going from like, missing a year versus missing 7.5 years now. But to me, it really was about like what's best for the family, like have all of the, visuals been approved by family, like has the social media been approved by family, not to add on like more responsibility to my aunt, or like other, family members, but it's really about like what is the story that you want to tell, even when it comes to, updating the ward, like who's going to be talking about it, who's going to be releasing that information. And I think it's also been a shift to like centering women and the centering Indigenous women as the folks who kind of like carry the power to have these conversations.
One thing I'm learning from you, Olivia, is what I'm hearing is a lot of these efforts came from the family members and the community coming together, which is wonderful because I know that there's been a lot of outreach for Rita and her return. Someone did ask, and if you're not comfortable answering, please don't. But someone did ask, so I'm going to give them the opportunity. How was this explained to her children and as they grow up?
Yeah. Obviously at this point, they know some of them were fairly young at the time of her disappearance. And so it's like, they know their mom's not around, right? They had been living with family at the time, but, at some point the message did shift from like, we don't know to, like your mom's missing. We don't know if she's coming back. She had like I said, she has an older daughter that now has 2 children of her own. They're younger. And so I kind of feel like a lot of the responsibility has fallen on her shoulders to really kind of be that support person for the younger siblings, as well as Iris stepping in. Everybody knows my Aunt Iris. She's asked to do a lot of things in the community culturally. She cooks for folks. She's taken in not only Rita's children, but other grandchildren. She's kind of stepped into that role of the matriarch and caretaker of a lot of people. And so, I don't think that there's ever a good way to share that information with children, but I think, like knowing that they're going to hear some of the rumors at some point, it's important to be as straightforward as you can in an age appropriate manner to talk about it.
And then someone also asked, and you touched on this, I think, a little bit, because you were talking about how people grieve differently and how we need to respect that. But someone did ask, how do you explain or how do you politely let the mother and the siblings know that you care and want to support them?
I can talk about a specific event that I thought was really beautiful. When I moved back home in 2018, we have our annual powwow. Finally came back like post-COVID this year, which was wonderful. But we actually had an opportunity to talk about Rita and raise awareness. And the tribe, that was kind of the first time I was like unexpectedly given the mic to talk about it. And so it was kind of nice to just let people know, like, you know, like tell the family, like you can give them hugs, you can tell them you support them. Like, I think a lot of times it's just kind of like giving folks the space to do that. So they ended up having an honor song where our family, you know, kind of like led in the front, and so many people from the community came down to express their support, which I think is really helpful when we've had other community events. I think you saw, like on, again, like on my first slide, you know, we have the celebration, we raise awareness for MMIW, and we have, you know, hundreds of people show up. I think a lot of times it's just like, you know, the physical presence is really important when we have events or when we have honorings, as well as I think, you know, like kind of stepping in and doing things, showing people you care. So I think that there's a lot of ways to express it that aren't re-traumatizing.
Perry, I think that our presenters today is going to address your comment a little bit better. And then, yes, Amber Webb, and I'm not sure if you know her, Olivia. Do you know Amber Webb?
I don't know.
She wants to make a comment about Rita, but I want to make sure that we're not here to make any type of assumptions or any type of, you know, this is here just to bring Rita's story out. So I'm going to ask Amber if she would like to say something. You're free to say it. Just please be very respectful. Again, we're just here to get the story out about Rita and then just bring awareness for MMIP. So Amber, if you would like to say something in a respectful way, feel free.
Thank you so much for letting me make a comment. I wanted to say that, so in 2018, I started this Book project in honor of murdered and missing Indigenous women because of losses that I'd experienced in my own community. And I was going to a Native Wellness Institute healthy relationships training in Miami, and I met Dara Jefferson. And it was funny because when I was doing this project, Rita's picture kept coming up, and I was kind of trying to keep it northern because the project is a book and I'm from the north, you know, but she kept showing up. And so when I met Dara, she had asked me to include her portrait. And then what ended up happening was because of that gathering, then the Ponca tribe asked me to bring the book down for a project, and it was amazing. I was able to meet her mom and bring the book there. And then I went to this this event that was held to bring awareness, and her brother was speaking at that event. And it was just, I just wanted to make the comment that, like, we're doing this work across the entire country and across the north, and we're all doing it together and in support of each other. But I think we can't forget that they're doing it with us. Like, they're doing it with us even though we don't see them. And it was really special. I feel like, even though it seems like I didn't know Rita, but I feel her name comes up a lot, and I think of her and I feel her moving from the other side. And I just think that that's really beautiful. And I you know, always sending love to her family. But I just thought, I don't know why I wanted to share that. I hope I wasn't taking up too much time, but I thought it was really special.
No, I really appreciate that. And I actually remember that now that you bring it up. And, you know, from our perspective, we know that Rita's story has touched so many people. You know, obviously we wish that it didn't happen in this way. But, you know, we're really thankful for those that carry her name and her story with you. So I appreciate that.
Someone else has a question. Orlando asked, was the MOU, and I'm not even sure what MOU means, between the tribal police and county sheriffs? If so, how did you see them work together with the family? That's a good question, actually.
Yeah, I'll just be specific on that piece, that's just general coverage for the settlement. You know, just like for emergency response, it wasn't specific to Rita's issue, but it's kind of like a contract between the two. We have something similar set up for emergency medical services, so that when our EMS folks are unavailable, like the Montour EMS can respond on the settlement. And so it's needed because it's federal land, right? Like land held in trust, typical to a reservation. And so it's just something that we do to have additional coverage, just because we're small enough and closely located to some of those towns.
Thank you, Olivia.
Mhm.
If anybody else has questions for Olivia, please ask her now. I don't believe she's going to be able to stay on a long time. I do want to say, McWetch, for you being here today. It was beautiful. And just keep doing what you're doing and spread the word. The family, I would agree, has done so much, and they're very fortunate, Olivia, to have you on board and coming out and spreading the word about Rita.
Yeah.
And I do hope for you and the rest of the family that one day there is closure, full closure. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time today.
yes, you're very, very welcome. Anybody else real quick before we move on? McWetch, Olivia, have a beautiful day, and thank you so much for sharing the story. Okay, so now we are going to bring it over to our presenters today. So I'm going to give it over to Teresa and Lestina.
So if we can jump on, this is just your opening slide. If we can jump onto the next slide here. Due to time, we'll definitely zip through a lot of this here historical information. I think most everybody here really kind of gets the history of I put information on here, and I know Lestina did as well, for you to, when you get a copy of the PDF, you can do your homework, you can look at all that resource and information, so that way we have a chance to talk over it a bit. And I guess for you is to think about the history, so generational trauma and generational dysfunctions that occur from those traumas. And so what happens to folks, to their filters. I noticed somebody had a question in there about, and so since here it's talking about the residential schools, they wanted to know, if I'm understanding it right, why is it that they could find our kids, and now they're having this issue, right? My dad and some of my uncles and aunts were residential school survivors. I say were because the ones that went to residential schools in Ontario have all passed away. The one of the uncles that didn't end up going, he's still alive. So the toll that it takes upon folks, right? But also, what does it do to our filters? And then we're looking at dysfunction at home. We're looking at crutching. We're looking at what kind of resources do we have then. So that's what I want you to think about when you look at the history in another perspective. Before we would share the history, to draw that line and that correlation and help educate. But now we need to start looking at, how does that impact folks, so we can look at our issues and where we're at today. And so then what we can do, where we can empower ourselves. If we can jump onto the next slide. And this is more a little bit of the today stuff. So we're looking at the different kind of sources, and this is just a few, scratching the surface of where this is murdered and missing and human trafficking is coming from. Now, what I also want folks to think about as we go on here is, what do we have power and control over? What can we affect change on? And what takes a long time, and what is pretty much in the scheme of things overnight. So we can take our power back in ways. So when dealing with systemic racism, which I dealt with over the years and still even currently am, it's a long process, and it could be a full-time job in and of itself. And again, if people are looking in ways that they can support, then to think about, if you have an interest in politics, if you have an interest in the legal aspects, then this might be a venue for you. And to allow yourself to grow and change in those areas, to bloom. So don't tell yourself you're stuck in it because there isn't another voice. If your passion moves, move with it. So go right ahead. And then there's also within the foster care system, we look at systemic racism and things like that. So when our children are being sent outside of our communities, so then maybe becoming a foster parent and things like that, or opening up a home center for the youth at home where you can house more than just taking in a couple of kids, right, as a foster parent. So this is just to get your gears going, but also to open up dialogue and conversation as people in your community or your friends, family, other youth are saying things like, I'm interested and I don't know what I can do. These are all kinds of venues, and that's what I want to look at, the solutions. What can we do? And so to start talking about then, hey, you really seem to love to be working with the youth, but you're more at home, you're more like a parent, like a role model. Did you ever think about foster care or opening up a center? And then we have such high rates, so we can jump onto the next slide. So as you can see, I'm hoping your gears are going as you're looking at abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, how your gears are going in venues that we could get into to take care of ourselves at home or in the urban off the reserve, in the communities off the reserve, what we can do for ourselves, create a non-for-profit, reach out to the other non-for-profits that have a foot in that so that way maybe you can connect with them and use their 501c3. Or how can I get my own going? And so I can create this resource that is needed because this is groundbreaking. Can we jump onto the next slide? Thanks, Liz, if that's you doing it. So this is a little bit of the history of the Red Hand. Again, due to time, we're just going to jump over this, but this is how it began. A lot of people I'm hearing outside of Indian country do not know the history of the Red Hand, and they're just doing it as a trend kind of thing. So this is to help to educate the history of the Red Hand. Again, you see at the bottom, I cite that source, and in the bottom of all the slides, it's got the link for you, so you can jump on there, and you can do. I encourage, click on these slides, click on those links, because it has more information beyond this Red Hand. It's going to have, and especially if you run a program or a non-for-profit, it's going to give you some resources and information that you may need. So jump on those resources and read them because they are a wealth beyond just this, right? If we can jump onto the next slide here. And this is Lestina. So I'm going to turn it over to Lestina.
Okay, so good afternoon again, everybody. As Teresa has been leading up to, I want to give you guys a little history on the modern day MMIW movement. So traditionally the color red has said to be signified as calling on to ancestors in the spirit world. So for ceremony and powwows, Native Americans dressed our children in red as an introduction to the ancestors, calling upon them as their guardians to the young. And traditionally, like today, we see a lot of the red handprints, we see a lot of the red dresses, we see a lot of the red t-shirts, red shawls, and red regalia. Next slide, please. So on February 4th, 1982, Eleanor Laney Elenin was found on the outskirts of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, after she had been missing for several days. When the police got there, they noticed car track marks that appeared to pull into like an abandoned road or a back road, and they stopped, and there was obviously a scuffle because those marks were still left in the snow, and they found this lady's body. And it appeared that she did struggle, you know, she fought for her life in her last moments on earth, and nobody was ever charged with this murder, and the police in Canada barely investigated this case. Laney is Agnes Woodward's mom's older sister and is one of the 4,000 women from Canada who are on the list of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirits Plus. So for some of these families, it's hard to reopen those old wounds because for some of them, they haven't really accepted the fact that their loved ones are gone, or they haven't had the physical body as the physical closure to these cases. Next slide, please. So this is a dress that Agnes made, and it's called Love Beyond Words. One of my relatives, Lakota Renville's name is also on here. She is a cold case. And if you would like to look up her information or her case, you can do that online. So this address is actually meant to express the way that we see our loved ones, the way that we love them unconditionally and eternally. It is also meant to combat the negative words and the negative views that the media, police, and society have said about our beautiful, resilient relatives. Our love gives us strength and courage. Our love is stronger than any negative thought or comment. We are their voice. We are each other's strengths. So today we want to thank each and every family who contributed to some of the words on this dress. This dress was made with a lot of love and tears and positive intentions. Next slide, please. So human trafficking, sex trafficking, and the intersectionality with MMIP. Sex trafficking is defined as using force, fraud, or coercion against another for a commercial sex act or causing a minor to commit a commercial sex act. So some of the places where sex trafficking can occur would be the pipelines, peep shows, adult pornography, child pornography, massage parlors, saunas, escort services, phone sex, mail order bride services, casino, street prostitution, online prostitution, prostitution tourism, prostitution rings, international sex trafficking, domestic sex trafficking, and working in strip clubs. And the reason why a lot of our Indigenous relatives are at risk of this is because we have some of the highest poverty rates in the United States. And that's always been like the #1 statistic on a lot of our Native American statistics. And a lot of people think that traffickers are the ones driving in your neighborhood in the white vans looking to throw somebody in and carry them away. They're actually not like that. They find their victims through the internet, social media, or they use their current victims to recruit other victims. And, you know, sometimes it can be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be a community member. And it could be somebody who you would not generally suspect, but they're indeed taking part in sex trafficking rings. Next slide, please. Teresa, this is yours.
Make which. I know this one's hard to read. You're going to have to click on the link. That is how it came out no matter what. It has a lot of statistics for you. And then it covers over a lot of the barriers. As you'll understand, our statistics are really hard to obtain. So in order for, due to funding, due to federal government, due to policies, we have to have statistics. And to affect change, to change programming, to make a statement if something's funded by, say, the federal government. And so in order for us to get our voices and be able to say something candidly, we need statistics. But we're finding barriers in that. And again, because it's groundbreaking, because of, and in my background, I have learned that we have to find each community is different and the communities surrounding. So it could be systemic racism. It could be just ignorance and lack of education in it and training. It could be due to policies that need to be changed between law enforcement departments, where our statistics between the hospitals would be reported to. It could be that they're looking at our people and writing it off as domestic violence, as somebody who had a drug addiction. It was just drug overdose, things like that. They're just creating and trying to take control of this and getting them to report. Sometimes the case is closed before it's reported, or is even reported to their tribe or a local tribe around. So say I moved all the way out to California and I'm in northern Wisconsin. Could you report it to those local tribes? And they would then report it or report it back home for me, because I'm the same tribe as up here in Anishinaabe, but my family, my reserve is in Ontario. So where would my statistic go technically? And then there's all these technicalities. How would they categorize me? And we hate to be a number. We hate to be a statistic. But without these numbers, we can't affect change, right? And because that's how things seem to work. If we can jump on to the next slide. So here's some more on that, the shocking statistics, and thank you, Liz. And it goes into more of what I was saying. This here is just, again, for your own program changing. Are you going to find these statistics accurate? Multiply them by what you're seeing here. Are they being really reported as something that's happened at home or being misreported? And how is that going? So again, it is just groundbreaking. We have to encourage each other to report. Yet then we're looking at potential being victimized again, because what happens when you report a loved one to a system that there's, say, systemic racism or ignorance, and so you let them know and they write off you or your loved one as a druggie or as somebody who asked for it or things like that. So how we can then advocate is what we're looking at, because one, if you're into that legal, if you're into affecting that change, working with that system, if that is another venue, and that is great, that is needed. But also then there's that other portion of it where you feel re-victimized. And then the different, just like as Olivia was saying, we go through mourning in different ways and forms. We also go through the trauma in different ways and forms. So what resource may that individual need? What venue are they going down or avenue are they going down in reaction to the traumas? And the trauma doesn't stop occurring, right? Because then you have follow-up phone calls. You have, did they close the case? So more follow-up on needed resources for that family and individual, and not just them, but their friends as well. But then the community check-in, because what does it say to the community as the community is listening to how that system around them is responding or failing to respond? So again, then it's more recuperation over here and going, what can we do? What needs to be done to empower ourselves? And then what do we need to do to heal, not to fuel what's going on, right? So how does that serve anything when we look at that? And we have to think about that. How does that serve anything in this situation? So to take a step back and go, what will actually do us good in this situation? It's very hard. Can we jump onto the next slide? I know for time factors, we're really going to have to, because I'm all about solutions. And I think our solutions truly are based in our culture. And it's not victim blaming. It is just finding, what can I do and I can't do in this situation? Which way am I going to take and go with this? Or will it make things and matters worse? And that's the reality of it, because you know, when we're dealing with systemic racism, can I force them to stop treating my now grown children the way they did? Or can I, and what can I do? So we take it back and look at ourselves, right? And that is where the power is at when we're feeling so powerless. So here's some more. I really want to talk also about the men. We don't see much of our missing or murdered men, and men are also trafficked, but many are killed. And whether it's from within our own communities or due to racism or whatever other issues, they're out spearfishing here, things like that. How did it occur? We need to talk about our men as well. They're missing. And oftentimes, our men are strong and have pride and have this, there's a discord between us and the system because of the historic relationships that we've had with the system. It's changing all over and for the better in some areas, as Olivia shared. And so that's wonderful, but in a lot of areas it hasn't. So we need to also think about the men's, and then here the needs. We're going to get more into the needs now. So again, on the data is so important, and I don't want to be a number. I don't want to be a number. I don't want to be a pedigree, but yet I have to ask folks. So this is a dialogue to have and feel out the individuals and their personality and how you approach the topic, but why we need to be and reporting so we can get that data, get that statistic, get that evidence to prove to be that voice, because that is how they hear it, right? They need that data. It's so important. And the need for investigative resources as well is very important. So that's more venues and fields we can jump into. Teresa, you got your hand up, honey. If we can jump on the next slide as well.
Yeah, real quick, you mentioned something very important, and that data was important, and reporting is important. But is there one database for all missing and murdered Indigenous relatives?
Not with the federal government at this time that's truly effective. That all law enforcement departments are working with and are mandated to report to is the thing. That's the thing. And so that is where more rallying and change, where more movement needs to kind of be focused and pulled into as well, is to start networking and pushing for your local, and not just law enforcement, but hospitals as well, to be reporting, domestic violence shelters, safe houses, to be reporting and being told they have to report. Work with your politicians, talk to your tribal judges and say, hey, who do we need to be pushing in our local state, in our local area or province, in order to force the hands of law enforcement to report? And then can we create some sort of repercussion where they failed to report it to a federal source that is a national database that all folks have access to? And so that's, like I said, a lot of this is really groundbreaking in creation. Deb Holland's office was just created a few years ago. So much of it is in creation. So through it, we're going to find the needs and barriers, but then where we can pull ourselves into. So if it's something you're interested in or have passion in, that is really important and needed. Miigwech for that question, Teresa. And this slide then, if nobody else has questions, goes to Lestina.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just want to add on to that. There's the Name Us website, and that Sovereign Bodies Institute also has their own data, but it's not published publicly. So you would have to request it, and they are very particular about who they share their data with, because they have some issues with the federal government regarding where they got their data from and how they collected it. So there are different venues or different websites out there where you can try to gather some data. But the most thorough data share that I have seen has been by Sovereign Bodies Institute, because it gives you details regarding each case, whether there was alcohol, drugs, or suspected domestic violence involved, and the status of the case today. So
Okay, Lestina, is that a nationwide organization, the Sovereign Body Institute?
Yeah, so they do a lot of their own research, and they'll just have one research base. But if you look them up online at the Sovereign Bodies Institute, you will see a contact information on how you can ask them for some data.
And then the other organization that you mentioned, you said that they don't advertise it.
The Name Us database is, so it's everybody on the Name Us database. It's not just Native American people. It's
Okay,
all across the United States.
got it.
So some of the barriers to obtaining statistics and some information about the statistics that are not out there is the major gaps in data collection. Native women specifically face violence from both Native and non-Native perpetrators. They are more likely to be victimized by non-Native perpetrators. And Native women today are 5 times more likely than non-Native women to experience interracial violence in some parts of the United States. Redness has been made to disappear, such that the contemporary Native Americans have become largely invisible to white people. This trend of erasure continues to play out in both the media and in systems of data collection on violence against Native women. Only about 5% of cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women were covered in the national media, and only a quarter were covered by any media at all, including local, regional, and national news. And this is just another way where we're being erased in the media. They continually do this as a form of systematic oppression and of institutional racism. Next slide, please. So some of the ways that the data can be skewed is there's misgendering of transgendered women. We always want to include our two-spirit relatives when we talk about the missing and murdered Indigenous people. because they are, they're just as important. And I feel like they're another population that, in addition to being a part of the indigenous population, the LGBTQ two-spirit community is also a separate population. So sometimes their numbers don't always get reported too. There's always an explicit reference to a victim's criminal history. The media oftentimes wants to portray the victim as like Ms. Walker said, well, she must have wanted that violence against her, or she must have asked for it, or some way, shape, or form they are portraying our relatives as putting themselves in situations where they will be deliberately harmed. Native American racial identity doesn't exist in every police system. Unknown racial status defaults to white. So if a woman, man, or a two-spirit relative gets arrested, and if they don't give them their racial identity or say anything to them, then it automatically gets put into their database as a white person. Tribal citizen status is not always accurate or is missing due to government policies. So sometimes there's a lot of people from the indigenous community who do not have an enrollment number, or who do not identify as being from one particular tribe, because they may be from many tribes. And because of that reason, they may not want to be enrolled. So we don't have the accurate statistics on those cases. 3 out of 4 MMIW cases don't list a tribal affiliation. Out of the 5,712 MMIP cases nationwide, only 116 of those were logged into the Department of Justice's database. Complicated relationships between tribal, state, federal, and local governments contribute to the failure to address cases of violence against Native women. And altogether, there's 574 federally recognized tribes. However, when I was researching, I found out that there's also 200 tribes who do not have federal recognition, but who do still identify as being part of a specific tribe. So,
Hey, Lestina, I have an important question for you. I apologize. You just said something really important. You said that there was 5,700 MMIW cases nationwide, but only 116 were actually logged in. Why?
I couldn't answer that. I think I would say, going back to what some of the other lady presenters have said today regarding that distrust with the police, I think that some people, don't trust the police to do their job in that investigation. And also, like when you register with the NamUs database, there's a representative that will come out and ask you a bunch of questions. So maybe in that process, maybe that kind of pushes people away. Because
Are they categorizing them differently then and not categorizing them as MMIW? Therefore, they're not making it on the database?
So that's on the
Teresa is shaking her head yes.
Yeah, that's the Department of Justice's database. And so that's a federal entity.
Yes.
Whereas these other cases could be tribal cases, they could be state, they could be county, but they're not federal.
Wow.
Next slide, please. That's you, Teresa.
And I'll answer a little bit of that real quick too. Again, since this is all groundbreaking, and historically how funders and things work, it becomes controversial, our responses, our voice. So are we allowed to really have a voice in this yet without there potentially being backlash? I have a relative, and I'd like to keep some of my resources anonymous, that was a head of the National Tribal Law Enforcement, and would explain that. And so this is talking about nationwide, but I also have family in Canada, and the work I've done over the years, there is many law enforcement departments that are non-tribal that just don't care. They just write it off in their minds. Now, again, it's unique and individual in each area. Is it dealing with an ignorant officer is it dealing with? And we're looking at autopsies, coroners as well, who is writing off when they get a body as drug overdoses, domestic violence. So another field of interest that we could use more supporters in that would do a little bit deeper of an investigation on that body. And they'll close the case, he had said. Oftentimes law enforcement will close the case and write it off, and they're not going to bother reporting it. So will that number be there? So why the importance of creating a law where they have to report it? As Lestina said, how many tribes are out there that the government still doesn't recognize? So will they be listed? But yet they were targeted because of, yet their filters were skewed because of generational trauma, because they are tribal and they did go through. And so, you know, we're looking at all of that as well. There's 60 scoops from Canada. There's folks where parents had an affair, where in the 1970s, which I didn't put on there, up to the 1970s in the United States and Canada as well, they did forced sterilization. So they took a young girl, a young woman that was pregnant, they removed that baby, and maybe she gave birth, and they took that baby from her, told her the baby died, and then sterilized her. They put that baby in a home, whether sold the baby, gave it away. So this is another form of trafficking. And then again, this is another number. That family knew, that society knows that child is Native, is being targeted for what has generational trauma instilled within them. Again, what they go through. So would they be listed as? So these numbers are going to be off no matter what. You can look at and the question about, you know, why were they finding our kids no probs back with residential school, but then now today have such an issue? That's a question for them, but that question is a question designed to expose a truth, and a truth that I think we get that answer to. Also, there's overwhelmingness, like Olivia was talking about in Minneapolis and the area that you're at. So you need to know what the situation is in your area, in your community. And so here we're going to look at, you know, this was just some of the historical changes as well. So we're going back into that. And then some of those resources that Lestina was talking about, Olivia also touched on a lot of that. Minnesota's done so much of the groundbreaking stuff. The ladies out in Minnesota and their supporters, I have to give a shout out to. Minnesota, I think, is one to look at and contact if you're looking to get into this, because of what happens when you're doing groundbreaking work to prepare yourself for. This is not to shy you away. This is to smarten up, you know, and be toughen up too. Or there's backlash sometimes. There's, oh, she or he's crazy, or conspiracy, or somebody had mentioned in chat being scared to report to law enforcement because then you're targeted by law enforcement. And I understand and know that truth up to today very well and currently. So I get that. And because of these things, if you're speaking out against or addressing these barriers and needs, be prepared for that and don't take it personal. And then again, safety issues. You don't want to become a number or a statistic. So how do we, and Lestina will go into that later, best prepare ourselves and our family to protect our interest and that. So if we can jump onto the next slide here. When you get the PDF, or we have to request the PDF from Liz or Teresa Burrington's team, you will have all of these resources to dive into, and I hope you do. And then this slide goes on to Lestina.
Lestina, you're muted.
Sorry. So this is Deb Howland, our first Native American Secretary of Interior, who has been very instrumental in launching the boarding school investigation and also in carrying over some of the work that the Trump administration started. So she actually started a unit called the Missing and Murdered Unit. And what this does is it expands on the work of the Presidential Task Force on the Murdered and Missing Indigenous People that was established in 2019. However, the difference between both of them, next slide please, is that when Trump founded Operation Lady Justice, it was a 2-year pilot program, and it was started by all federal employees, which none of them were actually Indigenous. So a big backlash in the indigenous communities where they're not even consulting like native tribal leaders, or they're not even consulting urban communities to see what we need. They don't even have a Native American representing us on the staff. So that was some of the backlash that the Operation Lady Justice program received from the Native community. I did sit in on a few of their phone calls one time. And I would say that there was just such a huge response by every different tribe in the United States and different tribal leaders, that I don't think that it was too productive, because people wanted solutions. Like we know this is happening in our communities. We know women, girls, boys, our two-spirit relatives and our men are going missing or found murdered. We know that's happening. Like, a lot of people just want solutions. Like, what are you guys going to do to help that? And I think with Trump's administration, they were just gathering all of that information. So they really didn't take any action steps. It was just like a lot of listening sessions and a lot of gathering information. But with the missing and murdered unit, Deb Haaland is actually involving tribal communities, tribal leaders, and more tribal nations onto this unit so that everybody can be on board. And I think she's even involving police on the federal, state, and local level so that everybody has a voice during these meetings. And her overall vision is that everybody will eventually collect and share data among the different jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies that oversee Indian country. Because for some of us, we know that you can go onto a reservation and it's very checkerboard. Like, 1 5-mile marker might belong to the state, while the one beside it belongs to the tribe, and then maybe immediately after that it belongs to the federal government, or it's held in some other form of trust. So we know there are jurisdictional issues that are in place, and so I really believe that the missing and murdered unit is starting to address some of these, but I think we still have a long way to go. And then I included some of the existing criminal databases, such as the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, also called NAMUS, the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, and the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, including the National DNA Index System, NDIS. Next slide, please. And this is Teresa.
Now, a lot of those databases that Lestina covered are wonderful. CODIS I'm familiar with due to my criminal justice background as well. In the state of Wisconsin alone, Canada, United States, nationwide, each one varying in the numbers. But for a long time, they had thousands of rape kits that were decades old. Their state crime lab hasn't even been able to evaluate or get to. So again, this hinders justice when you look at it. And then when we look at currently, you'll hear a lot of our people talking about how come on the news this non-native person is all over the news, they went missing immediately, but one of our people, the media doesn't even cover it, isn't putting them up, or it's a quick blip. So again, the differential treatment that we're looking at that hinders. But then what can we do? Do we open up our own news source that non-natives might want to watch? So what is your passion? And make it a national news source. Do you get involved in investigations and create or work with your tribal PD, your BIA office, things like that, and do investigations or become a private investigator and maybe make it a non-for-profit as, again, our people in budget. So being a part of the change, again, is we've been talking so much on why we need to report and become at least a statistic on their registry in some kind of capacity, and document where if you don't have a resource with your local tribal office or in a community center and advocacy, you might want to create one or see who could create one where they could be following up to say, let's see that you put them on. They said they reported themselves. And so kind of a follow-up and a checkup going on here. But again, we need to report. If you report and you become a problem with law enforcement, now you're on their radar as you're reporting as a victim or reporting your loved one as a victim. This needs to be, again, documented and reported. The response or lack of response to it, where you bring it up to the Federal Department of Justice, then that needs to go up to Deb Haaland's office. things like that. So you, again, you can go back to your tribal judge, things like that, and say, what do we do? Where do we go with this? Because we need to get this voice out there and bring this evidence. So keep your emails and things like that and the responses of it and forward it on. And so we'll jump on the next slide due to time.
Okay, so golden rule, what can people do at home? Each person has a talent or skill, no matter their race, age, or gender identity. I'm a big fan of everybody has a part to play in this advocacy movement, because it doesn't matter if you're a red dress dancer, if you wear a red t-shirt, if you show up at events, if you bring water, or if you speak out, you use your voice in your education, or you use traditional ways of healing to help people in this movement. We all have a role. I don't believe that anything or anybody is insignificant, because I believe that we all play a part, and it's all our role as human beings to bring awareness to this. Next slide, please. So I've seen a lot of questions in the comments too about getting onto solutions. So what can we do to try to prevent this? I pulled up some good information by the Great Plains Behavioral Health about creating an If I Go Missing folder or using a safety app. Some of these safety apps have GPS tracking on them, like Silent Beacon, OneScreen, or Be Safe, which you can give to your relatives, which will help you to locate them, or at least pinpoint any last locations before they have disappeared if they go missing. Educate yourself and your family about substance use disorders and how traffickers use drugs or alcohol to control their victims. Check in regularly with friends and relatives, and always know who is around your children. Next slide, please. So the If I Go Missing folder can be created for yourself or your children. It should include a clear recent photo of yourself, fingerprints if you're able to get those, online and personal technology logins, social media passwords. I know Facebook has that legacy contact, but if you can just set up another person that has access to these accounts, that would be good. Bank account numbers, dental and other medical records, a copy of your driver's license, any photos or even descriptions of your scars or tattoos, pictures of jewelry you wear often, names and addresses of places you frequent, handwriting samples, your vehicle information, VIN, license plates, the layout of your typical daily routines, cell phone and laptop serial numbers, names and descriptions of the relationships with the people closest to you, and contact information for your friends and family members. This file should be accessible as an emergency contact list only. It could be a paper copy or it could be a digital copy. I know a lot of our relatives don't have access to computers, and even if like somebody's grandchild would go missing, an older relative may not know how to access the computer or may not know about all this technology or all the things that we have going on these days. So it's good just to keep this like in a book somewhere. Next slide, please. So the best way that we can do prevention is to educate your relatives, build healthy communities as barriers against trafficking and MMIP. How do we do that? We build resiliency by creating strong and supportive relationships. I'm not saying you have to have those with your family, but if you have some with other people in your community or your adopted family, participate in cultural and community events, build high self-esteem and self-confidence in your children, and even in the children around you who don't belong to you. Take a self-defense class, practice cultural, physical, mental, and spiritual wellness, create lifelines by having regular communication with friends and relatives. And a lot of this honestly just goes back to our traditional ways of living. In my culture, we always had the traditional family unit, your tuahe, and then we had your Tioshpae, which is your extended community, and then the Oyate, which is the people or the human race. So if we can get back to a lot of those traditional roles, I think we have a good chance of building healthy communities, which can serve as a barrier in preventing MMIP and in preventing people from getting into trafficking. Next slide, please. Teresa.
So now we're getting more into the solutions and the needs, a different path of helping. So we're looking at, say, somebody survived human trafficking. And sometimes a landlord is going to want to know, once they try to reestablish and rebuild, where have you been living? What have you been doing with your time? Job applications. So how do we answer those gaps and protect them from being potentially re-victimized by somebody thinking that they were into it or they're about that. And so that's another venue of support that people can get into, giving them some sort of answers on those forums. It's a barrier, it's a hardship they do go through. Social work, counseling, advocacy. And as Lestina was talking about, I believe where like I said in the beginning, we have power is at home, what we can do for ourselves, for our family, for our loved ones, our youth. Make a trend, make it trendy to heal the generational trauma, part of our 7th generation prophecies, to become with healthy barriers and heal our filters, what we deem is appropriate and inappropriate, what we've become desensitized to because of generational trauma and dysfunction. So now it would set up red flags for us instead, and as Lestina said, the drugs, her kit that she shows up, we also, with talking with Lestina and others, I was being brought aware of the issues advocates are having today, where they need a release of information. So I think it's best, as sometimes we write a will or things like that, that if you have a concern that your area has high rates of maybe gang problems, human trafficking, murder, missing, violence, domestic violence, whatever the situation is, that they get a release sign and go again to your tribal judge, go to your politician, go to your county clerk and say, how do I make this document legal? It might be just needing a notarized to stamp it in front of a witness signed, but who can you give a release information to? Now, 1, medical, and 2, kind of legal stuff. So that way they can call law enforcement and get information. That way they can call the hospitals and get information. That way they can get copies of your medical records. And this way, if they are in a state or don't know what exactly, because they're not medically educated, what questions they can be asking, they can find out from their advocate, what is it I need to get from the hospital? What is it I need to get from law enforcement? Okay, so, and then they get the list. So get that list from them, and then you retrieve it and you bring it to your advocate, and your advocate can go from there at that point. Is there an injustice here? What's going on? Who dropped the ball? And you can move forward or decide not to. Ask questions like, and so again, this is more legal things that we can do, how we can educate ourselves. What are our rights? There is a statute of limitations on things. So do I have time to step back from this as a loved one or a relative and then jump back into it later? Or if I say, I just can't handle this right now, am I SOL? So will it just be, they're going to close it up? So to know these things, all these unknowns where injustice can occur. So these are all more venues, if you have interest in helping or a youth has interest in helping, that people can get into. Creating safe houses, creating a non-for-profit, the detox. If there's a young individual that was being trafficked but survived, they often drug them up. So they're going to need some help with detoxing, with their organs, their overall health, their stomach, their digestion, their diet. So a nutritionist, and working for our people in those kind of fields and venues where they may be going to. So the vastness of the needs, you could do it via Zoom. So that way you could be, because there isn't enough help, you could be working across the nation as a nutritional consultant and working with those victims and survivors. Also, families like Olivia's who have gone through such trauma and there's still no justice. How does that impact trauma when overall system, their physical health, their mental health, and then even their environmental? So then how can we bring support in? What kind of needs do they have? So those are more venues to look at in evaluation and then in advocacy, and connecting them with resources. And maybe you want to be a part of one of those resources. That's your field of interest and passion. So that we can jump on to the next slide. And this is just meant to get your gears going. We're just scratching the surface here, right? And so here's more ways to help for the youth: being a role model, adults as well, a trendsetter against bullying, to self-respect, respecting relationships and each other. A lot of the generational trauma and generational dysfunction, again, has created unhealthy relationships and our domestic violence rates. So look at your community base and look at your statistics, where some communities has more prevalent gang issues as being their just beaming kind of issue there, their flashing light of issue, versus others it's domestic violence, others it's poverty and things like that, others it's physical health due to, like over at Grassy Narrows, Ontario, that's creating the compound complex issues. So if we could address this one root issue, it would help alleviate some of the other issues. And then we can see what's the other big beaming issue, the kind of throbbing issue in the community. So where we have power and what we can do to bring our statistics down, to bring the needless suffering down. And this is what we can have control over. So again, now when you're dealing with gang stuff, safety issues, there's retaliation. So you're going to want to, work with those youth and think about how they can safely go about being that in a good way and being humble. And again, as we're talking about creating positions, creating resources, this is groundbreaking. And the needs are going to change as we move. The red dress was meant to bring awareness in the beginning. Now awareness is here. Deb Holland's office is there. So as the need changes, so your field of interest or your need is going to bloom and move and grow. I hope we're not stagnant in this issue, right? So we can jump onto the next slide. Getting into law enforcement. So this is so you can see a lot of the resources for you for later. And if it's okay, unless Lestina has something more to say, I can really go on to the things that we can be doing if you want more examples. Otherwise, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Okay, so I do have a couple questions before we leave it up to the audience, if that's okay. And I'll bring this to Teresa and Lestina. Okay, you mentioned a couple of things that kind of, I don't know, awed me. So if you're Native American, can you be on the national database or not?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
When you go to search somebody though, or if you're doing your own research and you're looking for Native American victims, you'll have to really scour through the data.
So they don't have like a search button for Native Americans?
They do, but it's extensive.
Okay. Wow. I'm shocked that we're here in the year 2022 and we still have so much work to do in this area. I honestly thought we made gains, and we have, but it looks like they're very few. I'm also hearing that community-based is the best way to go. When the community comes together and does things and makes efforts together is makes this whole thing much more effective. Am I correct in saying that?
I think you are correct in saying that, because this movement started out as a grassroots movement. And unfortunately, for a lot of our relatives, it takes their own relatives to find them. I don't know how many stories I've read of cases in South Dakota where family and community members have conducted their own searches and have located bodies. So I don't think that the grassroots movements level is going to go away. I think we need to make a lot of progress with regards to collecting and getting state, local, and federal support for Indigenous people. I'm a certified victim advocate, and in all of my trainings, we rarely talk about MMIP cases. And from my perception, I think that we as Indigenous communities need to have our own advocates for missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, because domestic violence cases have those, elderly abuse people have those, any type of abuse has an official role as an advocate. And I think if we could create something like that for our Indigenous communities, I think that would help people to get the support or access resources that they can use to search, and even if it's just with food resources, like I'm going to provide a meal for everybody who helped search, or even if it's I'm providing coats for those who are going to go out there and search, because the last time they seen them was in this open field or walking down the highway. So I would really hope and pray that Deb Howland and her staff are going to make some type of leeway on addressing this situation on a more national level.
And there are traditional, like up in Manitoba, over in BC, Ontario, they had created some traditional warrior societies. It's a volunteer base where they do patrols and take shifts of areas that are high threat issues. And so those are also things to do. Eric had mentioned in the comments, a sting operation, and that is kind of what they did, but again, you're going to have to look at your areas and laws, because will they prosecute him if you set that up in such a way? And you're going to want to document everything, have a video, audio, all of that, and safety, safety, safety. Find individuals with that background, but that's a great idea that Eric brought up. So that's the thing too, bring this conversation up and see what ideas people are bringing up, because they're going to base it off the needs in their communities. And as Teresa asked, what we can do at home, do we think it's really going to change? Look at our domestic violence rates, look at the statistics in your community. And I'm not just saying domestic violence, I'm talking about the gang issues. I hear from other Indigenous in Montana, it's a daily thing, South Dakota, the gang issues, and this is at home. And so these are murdered and missing, and these are young men, oftentimes young girls being trafficked, and like Lestina said, sometimes brought in by somebody they already have in there, by a friend, by a relative. Whether it's a poverty issue or not, whether it's an addiction issue, whether it's due to they were sexually assaulted at some juncture when they were younger and lack of filter, or mom or dad was, so they were raised with this lack of filter and healthy boundaries, and so they're kind of just numb to where lines are on things. So I think that we really can change things if we start at home. We create that trend of being respectful to selves, being safe, being there for each other. Of suspicious vehicles that we're noticing, Menominee Nation is great for that. You'll see them posting on Facebook, seeing the suspicious vehicle, things like that, and they get the information, sometimes a picture, but it's safety, 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 and we need to have that conversation. How do you take that picture and not fear that? You don't know if they have a gun, and they're going to turn around and shoot you because they did have ill intent. So we need to do this in a safe way and ask people, even if you think you know how to be safe about it, still ask questions, because they may give you some advice you didn't think of. You know, sometimes your passions are great, but they can cloud you to safety. You just get out there too quick. I remember years ago in my 20s when I was going up by Duluth to deal with the human trafficking up there and the murdered and missing. And we talked about the girls being taken in those ships. And I talked about what Eric had said. I was like, let them take me. I'll pretend like I want to be trafficked, and I'll get taken on the ship, and then somehow I'm going to get them girls out of there. And I was just young, so gung-ho. And I was explained that these ships have cubbies and nooks that they could walk police through, and they'll never find your body. There's too many places to look for you, that they will shoot you up and drug you, and you'll be too out of it to be able to do anything about it. And so the different kind of things that can occur. So always to seek counsel before you jump into something you do. It's not to question yourself. It is just safety. Your heart can blind you sometimes, no matter how beautiful it is and well-intended. So safety, safety, safety. If there's any questions, I know we're running over time here. And
Yeah,
thank you
I just wanted to
everybody
say
for
too,
staying.
Teresa, I'd have to say what Natasha said. Very important. Yeah, we have to do it ourselves. We have to do it ourselves. We have to get involved as much as we can get involved to make change. That is what I learned today, number one. I also wanted to make an announcement that we are, and that's the thing too, is we don't know if these people are human trafficking or cases, because we don't know anything about. All we know is that they're missing. But we do have a human trafficking. We are developed or have developed. It's almost finished, and it'll be on our website. And it is a human trafficking training so that you will know what to watch for human traffickers. So please make sure that you have our website. I think that Liz put it in the chat earlier. It should be up and running within the next 30 days, but it's a certified training for human trafficking, specifically for American Indians and Alaska Natives. So I think if you guys want to stay on and ask them questions, feel free, maybe 5 more minutes, maybe for one question or two, and then we'll go. We are again over time. It seems like we never get through this, but it's such an amazing and important topic. And again, there's just so much more work to do in this area. So does anybody have any questions or any lasting words before we let these ladies go today?
I
And
just
you're-
have a comment,
Go ahead.
if that's okay.
Yes.
Hey, Cheryl, I know that voice.
Hey, yeah, it's a good conversation and a lot of information and good resources. And I know up here in the interior, they have started, our organizations have started MMIW, or, you know, they're not a group there, but it's something that's very serious because we've had men, young, very nice looking men and women go missing that we can't find. We've also had some elders that have gone missing and nobody can find them.
Mm.
And when somebody's loved one is missing, you know, with a Native person, the family usually just bands together, and family and friends and people fly in and they go looking. They do it like you see on TV, you know, they're in rows and they're walking and they're looking. The last place that person was seen, and they're serious about it. You know, if we have a drowning, the same thing happens. People come out in force, but we have a history of law enforcement not doing anything, you know, and then there's some prejudice going on here. I know in the 70s, there were some ladies missing, a couple of my friends, and they weren't found till later. And what happened to them was there was a serial, this guy was just, you know, raping and killing women, you know, Native women. And they did find one of my sister-in-laws and one of my friends finally, you know, years and years later. So back then nothing was done, you know. Yeah, they're missing, you know, that's all, you know, law enforcement would do. And I know one person was found, they opened up cold cases again, and my brother-in-law was part of that, but they did find some other, you know, more people, bones, you know. So anyway, I'm glad something's being done. And I know there's a big movement in Arizona. We were just down there last year. And there's a big movement there for MMIW. There's also some ladies that ride motorcycles in support of MMIW, you know, to bring about awareness and stuff. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. I'm so glad you're here.
And
Meet
you-
with Cheryl.
Yeah, you actually have a lady on from France. Her name is Fanny Adam, and she's listening and watching you guys. She was in Arizona with the MMIW filming some time ago. Yeah.
Very cool.
You
Thank
guys are international.
And as Lestina was saying, you could bring a dish. So there's also showing up during the times of bad news, during the times of worry, and supporting each other, bringing a dish to pass, things like that. Some comfort food that's healthy, that's going to support their system. There's all different ways to support and help and to rally, taking turns doing that, keeping a fire, chopping their firewood, go do their yard work for them. Let them just tend to themselves and each other. There's things that we can do that way as well. So create a youth group, a volunteer group that's willing to get the call. Hey, this family got this. Will you guys go over there and check and see if there's anything you need? Just be respectful of ceremonies going on. You don't have to know what kind of ceremony. You can't know all the different lodges. So, you know, just to stand back in a good way, but to show up and just to let them know you're there. If they need, reach out, here's my information, and just to be present. There's never anything you can say really that is going to be the right thing or bring all the comfort that they need. So don't be hard on yourself. Don't expect to know. And it, like I said, this is so groundbreaking. Not our experience as Indigenous, is historically, you can see we've been through this. But it's so groundbreaking going down these venues to get help, to get support, things like that. So because of it, don't expect yourself to know it all. It's okay to make mistakes. It's what we do with those mistakes, right? And to always be reaching out. So give yourself room to grow in it.
All right, we've run out of time, guys, but there's some really good things in the chat. I just
Yes.
really have to address real quick. And I thank you guys for staying on past the time. Ben brought up a really good point, asking if we've heard of drones being utilized. I know that I have not. I know that here living on Meskwaki, we have drones. But I'm not sure if it was actually used in Rita's case, because I know that they didn't have drones at the time. But I think that's another great resource. If the question is if it's available, I think that's a great resource. I think, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you guys for doing this, but I'm a liaison for missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, and I take a platform everywhere I go, and I bring awareness to well, what I'm doing is just basically getting their picture and their story out there, so they're never forgotten or their stories never go unheard. But one thing I wanted to point out was here in South Dakota, there's a search and rescue out of Rosebud. Her name is Shelby Lorenzo. And that's who I'm going for to get my training and my search party team together. And drones, I've used drones a couple of times in my searches. And right now I'm working with Native Women's Society to see if they can fund me a drone. So yeah, that's, I just wanted to say that much.
Cool.
And thank you for your presentation. And another thing is, everywhere we go, like everywhere I go, there's a lot of people that don't know this. So I went to Crazy Horse Mountain this past weekend on a Sunday, and there's a lot of motorcycle that came up to me and they didn't know anything about this. So a lot of this stuff is more of like the educational and like the training and stuff. I mean, we need to have more of it. Maybe like, how do you say it? Like a resort for like a MMIW, you know what I mean? Like an event for just like advocates and everybody wanting to learn and collaborate together. I think that's what we need as advocates. We need to come together and work as one, because like my experience, my emergency management won't help me. I hardly ever hear from the police, the BIA. So it's really hard, like for me and my program. So I have to pull my family, like my brother-in-law and my half side, you know, like my family into this just to go and search for somebody here. And we're right along the Missouri River. So it's really hectic, you know, when someone goes missing, or, you know, we don't have that 48 hours to wait or 24 hours, you know, we need to be on it. So that's another reason, like, and it's really hard because my funding right now is my fundraising. Like I fundraise for all of this stuff, you know, so it's hard for me to even, I don't have a lot of people or resources here. But
there's
yeah.
a lot of people here today on the call, so keep doing what you're doing. Ben also had a good suggestion, is look for grants, especially in areas of prevention. There's so many things. And then someone else said that they had, and I would love for you, Vanna, to reach out to me. She had trainings for prevention for self-defense. I think that's one area. Another area is teaching our kids. I remember when I was young, we had that safety class. It needs to be updated. It's old, and then we need it just for our Indigenous peoples. So there's so many more things that we could do in the prevention efforts, I think, with this.
And I love what Jessica shared as well. As a Jessica, sorry, that she's talking about those barriers you're hitting, the money. How is she living and paying her bills when all of this is volunteer and takes how much time? Once you get into it, you're going to see how much time it takes. So you're seeing, but you're hearing her doing it. You're hearing her persevere. You're hearing her go, okay, this is what I got to do. And now I'm doing it. Is it happening overnight for your girl? I bet not. And so, but here you hear her going, and then we do this. So, you know, not to get frustrated, and just it is what it is, and realize that, and then keep persevering forward, and then going, okay, let's work this way. And okay, that didn't work, and this is a better way, because you know, you're not going to know until it's like learning to tie your shoes. You learn a better way. And so don't be, again, hard on yourself or whatever you learned, however you learned it. And as Teresa just said, we're always needing the updates. There's new tactics employees on how they groom folks, right? And how they lure folks, or how legal loopholes are created. And so, or how policy changed and you didn't even know it. So again, updating. So that's another venue to be in. Somebody who likes to be on top of that, who likes to attend those meetings, get on those committees and boards, or be at their meetings, and then educating our communities at home.
Natasha has been doing this for 6 years, and anybody else, I think more work needs to be done, and I think we could utilize maybe some people in this group that are passionate about this. So reach out to us. Let's see if there's more work that can be done. Maybe we could come together, collaborate, share resources, and yeah, let's do more. So let's do more. We have run out of time. We've run over, and I always do this because I get passionate as well. This is just a much needed presentation. Lestina, Teresa, thank you so much for your expertise. I wish we had more than an hour and a half time. But I guarantee you you're going to be seeing more of us in this area, because we're going to be doing more, because more is needed. So, but thank you guys. Thank you for being here. Please take a minute to do a GIPRA. Also, please check out our trauma website. We have some really great resources on there. And then thank you, everyone. I hope this brought some much needed information to you in your way. Miigwech, have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
See you all, my relatives.